The Assyrian Empire was, without question, the most terrifying, savage, and merciless power of the ancient world. For centuries, the Assyrians rose, fell, and rose again, hammering their way across the Near East with discipline, innovation, and an insatiable hunger for conquest. Their armies marched farther, struck harder, and punished rebellion with a brutality that became the stuff of legend. Impalements lined the roads, captives were flayed alive. Towers of severed heads marked the fate of those who resisted. Assyrian kings recorded these horrors with pride, turning terror into a tool of governance and fear into a weapon sharper than any sword. To their subjects, they were an unrelenting storm. To their enemies, a nightmare made flesh. And across the ancient world, from the Nile to the mountains of Iran, one truth was whispered everywhere. No empire inspired more fear, no empire earned more hatred. Yet, behind this cruelty stood remarkable achievements: administrative mastery, vast trade networks, monumental engineering, and libraries whose knowledge outlived the empire that built them. This was the paradox of Assyria, a civilization that reshaped history through brilliance and blood. Welcome to Chronicles and Conquerors, where history's greatest empires, leaders, and battles come to life. From the rise of ancient civilizations to the legends of conquerors who shaped our world, every story here is crafted to inspire, educate, and ignite your curiosity. Subscribe and step into the past to uncover the power, glory, and lessons of history's greatest figures. Assyrian history is usually divided into three main phases: the Old Assyrian period, roughly 2000 to 1763 BCE, the Middle Assyrian period, from about 1365 to 1076 BCE, and the Neo-Assyrian Empire, from 911 to 610 BCE. Across all of these ages, one thing stayed constant: the Assyrian homeland. They lived in the fertile hills of what is now northern Iraq. No matter how far their armies marched, whether they ruled only a single city or an empire spanning from Egypt to Iran, their world revolved around one place: the city of Ashur. Nineveh, Kalhu, and other cities would rise as political capitals at different times, but Ashur remained the spiritual heart of the kingdom. The Assyrians called their land Mat Ashur, the land of Ashur. That didn't just refer to the city, it meant the god. Ashur, the divine lord of their people, was believed to be the true king of Assyria. The ruler who sat upon the throne was merely his steward, entrusted to defend his lands, expand his borders, and enforce his will. In the Assyrian worldview, every conquest was an offering, every campaign a sacred duty. Around 2000 BCE, the city of Ashur sat quietly on a cliff above the Tigris River, small, devout, and outwardly insignificant. It possessed no empire, commanded no vast army, and held no illusions of dominating the world. But Ashur possessed something far more potent than early military strength. It sat at a crossroads of wealth. The last great power in Mesopotamia, the Neo-Sumerian Empire centered on the city of Ur, had recently crumbled. Its final king had been dragged away to the Elamite capital of Susa, and the north was left without a master. In that vacuum, new forces stepped forward. Akkadian-speaking peoples, including the early Assyrians, Hurrian groups from the highlands, and Amorites, newcomers from the west. All of them scrambled to claim a piece of what the Sumerians had left behind. Ashur's strength lay not in armies, but in geography. Positioned directly on a vital trade corridor that linked Babylonia with the highlands of Anatolia, the city controlled one of the busiest arteries of Bronze Age commerce. Through this narrow passage flowed the lifeblood of the Near Eastern economy, and the Assyrians quickly learned to turn this geography into power. The early people of Ashur became master merchants, weaving together a network of caravans and trade colonies stretching deep into Anatolia. Their most famous outpost, the merchant center at Kanish, became a hub where Assyrian textiles, tin, and crafted goods were exchanged for Anatolian silver, timber, gold, and luxury materials. This was not a side business. It was the economic engine that enriched Ashur's elite families, funded its temples, strengthened its walls, and built the financial base that later kings would turn into imperial power. At this early stage, Assyria was not yet a kingdom. Its ruler governed as the earthly representative of the god Ashur, while a council of elders and a yearly civic official known as the Limu maintained tight control over finances and major expenditures. This mixed system of sacred kingship, civic oversight, and disciplined bookkeeping reveals an essential truth about Assyria's destiny. Its future empire would rise not only through conquest, but through organized commerce and disciplined statecraft. Ashur was becoming rich. It was not yet an empire, but the foundations were being laid. Assyria's first brush with real greatness came under an outsider. Sometime in the early 2nd millennium BCE, an Amorite warlord named Shamshi-Adad seized control of a nearby kingdom across the Tigris. From there, he launched a series of campaigns that created a short-lived regional power historians call the Kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia. Ashur was swept into his growing realm. Shamshi-Adad liked Ashur. Though he was not ethnically Assyrian, he seized the city, beautified its temples, invested in its infrastructure, and, for a time, made it one of his main residences before moving on to more lucrative conquests, including the wealthy city of Mari further west. He demonstrated how northern Mesopotamia could be unified into a single power, with Ashur as one of its jewels. Strictly speaking, he wasn't Assyrian by blood, but later generations of Assyrians looked back on him as one of their own. Several later kings even took his name as their throne name. In their eyes, Shamshi-Adad was the first truly great Assyrian king, a conqueror who showed what their land could become, but his power was fragile. After his death, his kingdom quickly unraveled. One of his contemporaries, the Babylonian king Hammurabi, moved in and swallowed up much of what Shamshi-Adad had built, including Ashur itself. Around 1763 BCE, Babylonian control over Ashur effectively ended the Old Assyrian period with a single decisive stroke. What followed is a dim patch in Assyria's story, a dark age, not in the sense of chaos and horror, but in the sense that our sources grow scarce. We know that Ashur fell under the authority of Hammurabi and his successors for some time, but their grip weakened. Eventually, Babylon itself was sacked by the Hittite king Mursili I around 1595 BCE. The city's first dynasty collapsed, and in southern Mesopotamia, a new Kassite dynasty took over. In the north, a different power rose, the Hurrian kingdom of Mitanni. For a while, the Assyrian kings were reduced to vassals of these Hurrian overlords. At one point, Mitanni's king ordered Ashur's walls torn down and oversaw its city council directly. Assyria was not only dominated, it was publicly humiliated. Yet even in subjugation, the Assyrians learned. From their overlords, they adopted light chariots, lamella armor, composite bows, and a new aristocratic military culture. These innovations, born in an age of humiliation, would later become the foundation of Assyria's war machine. When Assyria tried to break free too soon, the Mitanni struck back hard. Their king Shuttana attacked Ashur, looted its temple, and forced the city back into submission. But the Mitanni had problems elsewhere. The Hittites pressed them from the west, and their power began to fray. Sensing weakness, an Assyrian king named Ashur-uballit I seized his chance. He rallied Assyria, overthrew Mitannian dominance, and restored true independence. He didn't stop there. He reorganized the army and the government, reclaimed lost lands, and transformed Assyria from a city-state into a true territorial kingdom. His newfound confidence shows in his foreign relations. Ashur-uballit wrote to the pharaoh of Egypt as an equal, sending luxurious gifts, a fine chariot, horses, and precious lapis lazuli. In the same Egyptian archive, we find a rival letter from the king of Babylon angrily asking why his Assyrian subjects were corresponding with Egypt at all. In reality, Babylon no longer had any real control over Assyria. If anything, the balance of power was beginning to tilt the other way. Royal ideology expanded along with this new strength. Kings now described themselves not only as servants of Ashur, but as rulers ordained to command the world. Ashur-uballit tied Assyria and Babylonia together even more tightly by marrying his daughter to the Kassite king of Babylon. Their son, Kara-Hardash, briefly sat on the Babylonian throne until a palace coup killed both him and his mother. For Ashur-uballit, this was more than politics. It was a family blood feud. He marched south, crushed the usurper, and installed a more compliant Kassite prince as king. It was the first time we see Assyria openly intervening in Babylon's internal affairs. You could argue that this was the beginning of centuries of bitter rivalry between the two powers. After Ashur-uballit's death, skirmishes and border wars between Assyria and Babylon became a recurring theme. Neither side gained a permanent advantage, but the hostility never really went away. Assyria's next great turning point came under the king Tukulti-Ninurta I in the late 13th century BCE. He inherited a kingdom already expanding. Previous rulers had weakened the Mitanni and pushed westward. Tukulti-Ninurta drove things to a new level. After dealing with the Hittites briefly on his western border, he turned south toward Babylon, claiming that the Kassite king had broken some solemn oath. The details are lost, but the consequences were not. Tukulti-Ninurta invaded, defeated the Kassites, and did the unthinkable. He captured Babylon itself and violated its most sacred temple, the Asagala, dedicated to the god Marduk. For anyone in the ancient Near East, Babylon was not just another city, it was an intellectual and religious center, a place steeped in prestige and sanctity. To sack it was like destroying one of the holiest sites on earth. Tukulti-Ninurta tried to justify his actions with epics and propaganda, claiming the gods had ordered him to punish wicked Babylon. But in the eyes of many, he had crossed a line. As his fortunes faded and military setbacks piled up, his enemies at home grew bolder, rebellions grew, factions formed, and eventually members of his own family and the elite conspired against him. Tukulti-Ninurta was assassinated, and Assyria entered another period of decline. Western conquests were lost. Other powers crumbled too. The Hittite Empire vanished. Egypt was battered by the Sea Peoples, and the entire Near East staggered through the late Bronze Age collapse. Assyria survived, but smaller and weakened. Its heartland endured, yet its grand expansion had stalled. In the early 12th century BCE, a new king emerged to restore Assyrian strength. Tiglath-Pileser I. He liked grand titles, styling himself king of the universe, ruler of the four quarters. But he had the campaigns to back it up. He pushed Assyrian influence again to the Mediterranean, made coastal cities pay tribute, and fought the Aramean tribes who were pressing on Assyrian borders from the west. He boasts of crossing the Euphrates dozens of times in pursuit of these raiders, seizing plunder and enforcing Assyrian dominance. Yet Tiglath-Pileser's legacy wasn't only military. At home, he poured resources into Ashur, palaces, gardens, parks, and public works. He is the first Assyrian king we know to have founded a royal library, gathering clay tablets from across the realm, one of the earliest organized collections of royal knowledge in history. Under his watch, legal texts were revised and a more systematic law code, what we call the Middle Assyrian Laws, was compiled. For all his successes, the stability didn't last. After his death, Assyria slipped again. Over the next century and a half, Aramean incursions chipped away at Assyrian territory. By around 1000 BCE, the once mighty kingdom had shrunk back to a narrow core along the Tigris. The empire seemed near extinction, but Assyria would rise again. Let's pause and take stock. For roughly 1,000 years, we've watched Assyria rise, fall, and rise again. We've met early kings like Shamshi-Adad, Ashur-uballit, Tukulti-Ninurta, and Tiglath-Pileser I, each pushing their state outward, each limited by circumstance or their own excess. Now we come to the phase where Assyria becomes what most people picture when they hear its name, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a relentless war machine that dominated the Near East for 300 years. Its rebirth began quietly under Ashur-dan II in the 10th century BCE. He focused first on rebuilding the core, reclaiming lands in the north that had slipped away, containing the Arameans in the west, and securing trade routes to the Iranian plateau in the east. More importantly, he invested heavily at home, rebuilding temples, encouraging agriculture, resettling farmers on underused lands, and reorganizing the army. His successor, Adad-Nirari II, and the kings who followed him would put that foundation to use and radicalize it. These rulers rebuilt abandoned lands, revived agriculture, restored irrigation networks, repopulated empty regions, and forged a new economic system centered on permanent warfare. Unlike Egypt or Babylon, Assyria lacked a stable internal tax structure capable of sustaining its ambitions on its own. To survive at its chosen scale, the state required annual campaigns that brought in silver, gold, livestock, timber, textiles, grain, slaves, and tribute from conquered lands. Every palace, road, postal station, fortress, and standing army unit depended on these spoils. Without yearly plunder, the entire imperial machine would eventually collapse. This financial reality made Assyria one of the most relentlessly aggressive powers in history. War was not merely policy, it was survival. By 911 BCE, under kings like Adad-Nirari II and then Ashur-nasir-pal II, the Assyrian war machine was fully awake. Ashur-nasir-pal II in particular was a ruthless and brilliant commander. He campaigned north into Nairi and Urartu and west along the Euphrates, seizing the great city of Carchemish and forcing Phoenician coastal cities to acknowledge Assyrian supremacy. These campaigns weren't only about security, they were about wealth. Many expeditions were, in practice, massive state-sponsored raids. Caravans of loot, gold, silver, textiles, livestock, incense, and more poured back to the Assyrian heartland. After one campaign against a rebellious Aramean city, Ashur-nasirpal reportedly marveled at the sheer volume of plunder, comparing it to stars in the sky, too many to count. With such riches, he decided to build himself a new capital. On a site between Ashur and Nineveh, he transformed the small town of Kalhu, later known as Nimrud, into a magnificent royal city. New temples, palaces, gardens, and administrative quarters rose from the ground, along with housing for thousands of workers and captives who maintained the complex. At its inauguration, Ashur-nasirpal hosted an enormous festival, a truly imperial banquet said to have entertained tens of thousands of guests for days. Kalhu became the beating heart of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. But Ashur-nasirpal II is remembered as much for his cruelty as for his building projects. To display his dominance, he ordered horrifying public punishments, impalements, skinning alive, beheadings, burnings, and pillars stacked high with severed heads outside conquered cities. His inscriptions describe these acts with chilling precision, crafted to terrify any who contemplated resisting Assyria. The strategy worked for a time. Entire regions surrendered at the mere sight of his banners. But this brutality also forged a legacy of hatred so deep that every neighboring kingdom dreamed of Assyria's eventual destruction. His son and successor, Shalmaneser III, inherited an empire larger than any previous Assyrian state. But with size came resistance. In 853 BCE, a coalition of Levantine states led by a king named Hadadezer of Damascus, along with Hamath, Israel, and others, formed to block further Assyrian expansion. 11 kings joined forces and met Shalmaneser at the Battle of Karkar. Shalmaneser's inscriptions claim victory, but the fact that all his opponents remained on their thrones afterward suggests something closer to a bloody stalemate. In the following years, the coalition gradually fell apart, allowing Shalmaneser to pick off or intimidate its members one by one. Some would later become vassals and pay tribute, like the Kingdom of Israel under a later ruler. Externally, Shalmaneser could still project power. Internally, cracks were forming. The empire was getting too big for a single king to manage directly. Powerful generals and provincial governors, magnates, began to accumulate land, troops, and wealth, carving out their own semi-independent fiefdoms inside the empire. The central authority of the king grew weaker. Things worsened when Shalmaneser favored one son as crown prince over his elder brother. The passed-over prince rebelled, plunging the empire into civil war. Though he lost, the damage to royal prestige was serious. For decades after Shalmaneser, under rulers like Shamshi-Adad V and Adad-nirari III, Assyria stagnated. The magnates dominated politics. Only briefly under Adad-nirari III, and perhaps thanks in part to his formidable mother, likely the historical kernel behind the later legend of the Queen Semiramis, did royal power reassert itself. But the overall trend was decline. Once again, it seemed Assyria might fade, until a new king appeared who was determined to break the magnates and rebuild the empire from the ground up. In 745 BCE, a man named Tiglath-Pileser III seized the throne. He moved fast. He cut down the power of the magnates, reorganized the provinces, and created a standing army loyal to the crown. Unlike earlier mustered forces, this was a professional army recruited heavily from the lower classes and equipped by the state. He adopted a harsher policy toward rebellious regions and made sure that the instruments of violence answered directly to the king. To keep provincial governors from becoming too powerful, he divided territories, appointed loyalists, and increasingly turned to royal eunuchs as administrators, officials who, lacking their own dynasties, depended entirely on the king for their position. He imposed new taxes and labor obligations to support permanent troops and a sophisticated imperial bureaucracy. When cities or kingdoms resisted, they weren't just punished, they were dismantled. Large portions of their populations were deported and resettled elsewhere in the empire. In their place, Assyrian settlers and loyal subjects moved in. This policy had two goals: to shatter local identities that could fuel revolt, and to provide labor for agriculture and building projects where the state needed it. Over time, these mass deportations helped spread the Aramaic language across the Near East, eventually making it the common tongue of the region. Tiglath-Pileser III could be terrifying to his enemies, but to those who submitted, paid tribute, and supported him in war, he could be a stable and even protective overlord. Vassal kings who stayed loyal were often left on their thrones, ruling their small kingdoms with considerable autonomy, so long as they didn't cross Assyria's interests. Under his leadership, the empire expanded again in all directions. When he died in 727 BCE, Assyria was once more a dominant force, poised to challenge the remaining great powers. For nearly 2,000 years, we have watched Assyria rise from a quiet trading city on the Tigris into the most feared power the ancient world had ever known. We have seen merchants become kings, kings become conquerors, and conquest become policy. We have watched humiliation forge innovation, and innovation harden into a weapon of empire. By the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, the transformation was complete. Assyria was no longer merely a kingdom that waged war. It was a state that existed for war. Its armies were professional, its provinces were reorganized, its populations were moved like pieces on a board, its economy ran on tribute, plunder, and fear. This machine did not pause. It could not pause. And yet power on this scale carries a price. The brutality that crushed rebellions also planted hatred. The deportations that stabilized provinces also hollowed out loyalty. The endless campaigns that fed the empire also exhausted it. In Part 2, the Assyrian war machine will reach its terrifying peak. You will witness kings who ruled from glittering capitals, commanded armies that shook the world, and believed themselves chosen by the gods to dominate all creation. You will see Assyria stand toe-to-toe with Egypt, annihilate ancient rivals, and preserve knowledge that would outlive the empire itself. And you will see how the very system that made Assyria invincible also made its destruction inevitable. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next chapter.